Looking back, I wonder if I had always missed the signs or if they had been carefully hidden in plain sight. For 10 years, my marriage to Catherine felt like a storybook tale, the kind people admired from a distance. We had met in college, where her charm and wit were magnetic. She could light up a room with her smile and captivate anyone with her words. Catherine was the type of person who thrived in the spotlight, while I was content to stay in the background, cheering her on. Our life together was, by all appearances, ideal. We lived in a charming suburban home, complete with a picket fence and a golden retriever named Max. Catherine worked as an event planner, a role that suited her sociable personality perfectly. I ran a small but successful IT consulting business from home, a setup that allowed me to balance work and maintaining our home life. We shared everything, or so I thought. The changes were subtle at first, the kind of things you could easily dismiss. Catherine began working late more often, her phone always buzzing with updates from clients and vendors. She spoke animatedly about her projects, her enthusiasm infectious. I admired her dedication and didn't think twice when she said she had to attend networking events or client dinners. Her career was thriving, and I was proud of her. But over time, her late nights became more frequent, her explanations less convincing. She started coming home after midnight, claiming last-minute crises that needed her attention. When I asked why she hadn't called, she would wave it off, saying she didn't want to interrupt me. Her phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter or bedside table, was now always within her grasp. Its screen tilted away whenever I was near. One evening, as I worked late in my home office, I heard her laughing softly in the living room. The sound was distant but distinct, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. I walked out to find her sitting on the couch, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. She looked up when she noticed me, her smile faltering slightly before she quickly closed whatever she was looking at. "Just catching up with a friend," she said, her tone light but her posture tense. I nodded, forcing a smile, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The turning point came when Catherine announced she needed to attend a weekend conference out of town. It wasn't unusual for her to travel for work, but something about this trip felt different. She seemed more anxious than excited, her suitcase packed hastily the night before. I offered to drive her to the airport, but she insisted on taking a cab, citing an early departure. Her absence left the house feeling empty. I tried to focus on work, on taking care of Max, on anything that would distract me from the nagging feeling that something was amiss. But the quiet hours stretched long, and my mind kept returning to the inconsistencies in her behavior. On a whim, I decided to check our shared calendar. Catherine was meticulous about updating it with her schedule, but the conference wasn't listed. A quick search online revealed no industry events that matched the details she had given me. My stomach churned as I realized how little I actually knew about where she was or who she was with. When Catherine returned, she seemed more distant than ever. Her explanations about the conference were vague, filled with generic details that could apply to any event. She avoided eye contact when I asked how it had gone, her answers clipped and rehearsed. That night, while she slept, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen, my curiosity outweighing my guilt. The message was from someone named A, and the preview read, "I can't stop thinking about this weekend. When can I see you again?" My chest tightened as I stared at the screen, the implications clear. I didn't open the message. Instead, I returned to bed, my mind racing with questions. Who was, what had happened over the weekend? Was it a one-time mistake, or had it been going on for longer? I knew I needed answers, but I wasn't sure how to get them without revealing what I'd seen. In the days that followed, I became hyper-aware of Catherine's behavior. I noticed how often she checked her phone, the way she'd step out of the room to take certain calls. She'd become more guarded, her excuses for late nights and early mornings growing increasingly flimsy. I began keeping track of her schedule, noting the discrepancies and inconsistencies. I also started digging into our shared accounts. Catherine and I had always maintained a joint savings account, but she had her own personal checking account for everyday expenses. A review of her statements revealed transactions I couldn't explain. Dinners at expensive restaurants, charges from boutique hotels, and gifts from upscale retailers. They were all dated on nights when she claimed to be working late. Each discovery felt like a punch to the gut, the evidence stacking up like a house of cards ready to collapse. But I needed more. I needed something undeniable, something that would force her to confront the truth. My opportunity came sooner than I expected. Catherine had left her laptop open one evening, a notification from her email catching my eye. It was an invitation to a private dinner, addressed to her and someone named Adam. The date matched one of her late nights from the previous week. I took a screenshot and sent it to myself before closing the laptop. My hands trembled as I processed what I had found. Adam wasn't just a name on a screen. He was real, and he was in my wife's life in ways I hadn't wanted to imagine. That night, as Catherine lay asleep beside me, I resolved to find out the truth. Whatever secrets she was keeping, I would uncover them. And when the time came, I would make sure she couldn't hide from the consequences. After that sleepless night, my days blurred together as I tried to focus on work while secretly piecing together Catherine's betrayal. The once comfortable silence in our home became unbearable. Every glance and word exchanged between us tinged with unspoken tension. I told myself that I needed more evidence, not for my own satisfaction, but to ensure that when I confronted her, there would be no way for her to twist the truth. I started by installing a GPS tracker on Catherine's car. It was an extreme measure, one that made me feel sick with guilt, but I couldn't shake the thought that she was hiding more than I'd uncovered so far. The app allowed me to see her routes in real time and review her trips from previous days. As expected, her movements didn't match the stories she had been telling me. Her so-called late nights at the office often ended at an upscale restaurant on the other side of town or at a residential address I didn't recognize. With each discovery, my resolve hardened. I felt like a detective following a breadcrumb trail left by someone who had underestimated my capacity to uncover the truth. Her texts and emails provided more pieces of the puzzle. While she was careful to delete most of her conversations with Adam, fragments remained in archived messages and drafts. Phrases like, "I'll meet you at the usual spot," and "last night was perfect," painted a picture I couldn't ignore. One evening, Catherine told me she was working late again. This time, instead of staying home, I decided to follow her. My heart pounded as I trailed her car through the dimly lit streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She parked outside a small boutique hotel, her demeanor calm and casual as she stepped out of the car and walked inside. I waited in the shadows, my mind racing with scenarios. 15 minutes later, a man joined her. He was tall and well-dressed, his confident stride suggesting familiarity with the situation. They didn't hold hands or exchange any obvious signs of affection, but the way they moved together spoke volumes. They entered the hotel side by side, leaving me alone in the car with nothing but my suspicions confirmed. I took photos from a distance, my hands trembling as I captured the evidence. It felt surreal, like watching a scene from someone else's life. The betrayal was no longer just a suspicion. It was a reality staring me in the face. I wanted to confront them then and there, but I knew that acting impulsively wouldn't serve me. I needed to be methodical to ensure that when I exposed the truth, it would be undeniable. The weight of what I'd uncovered became too much to bear alone. I turned to my closest friend, Daniel, someone I trusted implicitly. Over beers in his backyard, I laid everything out. The messages, the GPS logs, the photos. His reaction was a mix of disbelief and anger on my behalf. "You deserve better than this," he said, his voice heavy with conviction. "But you need to be smart about how you handle it. Don't let her manipulate the narrative." Daniel's words solidified my resolve. He offered to help me compile the evidence into a coherent timeline, something that would lay out Catherine's deception step by step. Together, we created a dossier that included everything I'd uncovered, from the financial discrepancies to the photos of her and Adam at the hotel. It was damning, a comprehensive record of her betrayal. While going through Catherine's financial records again, I stumbled upon something I hadn't noticed before. A series of payments to a company I didn't recognize. The transactions were frequent but relatively small, just enough to fly under the radar. A quick search revealed that the company was a private event planning service, one that specialized in discreet arrangements for high-profile clients. Curiosity got the better of me, and I called the company, posing as a potential customer. I inquired about their services, feigning interest in planning a surprise for my partner. The representative on the other end was polite but guarded, emphasizing their commitment to privacy. When I mentioned Catherine's name casually, there was a brief pause before the tone of the conversation shifted. The representative quickly ended the call, leaving me with more questions than answers. That night, I revisited everything I had gathered, trying to piece together the bigger picture. It became clear that Catherine's relationship with Adam wasn't just a fling. The payments to the event planning service suggested a level of coordination and secrecy that went beyond a simple affair. Were they planning something together? Was it a business venture? Or was there a more sinister angle? My mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. I decided to dig deeper into Adam's background. Enlisting Daniel's help to uncover who he really was. What we found added a chilling layer to the story. Adam wasn't just an ordinary guy. He had a history of involvement in questionable business dealings, including a fraud case that had been quietly settled out of court. He was charming and persuasive, the kind of man who could easily draw someone into his web. With each passing day, the weight of what I knew grew heavier. I could barely look at Catherine without my anger bubbling to the surface, but I forced myself to stay composed. Confronting her without fully understanding the extent of her relationship with Adam felt premature. I needed to know exactly what I was up against. Then, one afternoon, Catherine left her laptop open again, her email logged in. I seized the opportunity, quickly searching for Adam's name. What I found made my blood run cold. They had been exchanging messages about a plan, though the details were vague. One email stood out. "Once everything is finalized, we'll have what we need to move forward. Just stick to the schedule." The schedule, the payments, the secrecy. It all pointed to something far more complex than an affair. Whatever they were planning, it involved more than just the two of them. And it was happening right under my nose. The discovery of Catherine and Adam's cryptic emails was a turning point, but it also opened a Pandora's box of questions I wasn't ready to face. Each line of their correspondence hinted at something larger, something calculated, and something I wasn't sure I could unravel without risking my own sanity. The words "finalized" and "move forward" echoed in my mind, taunting me with their vagueness. What were they planning, and how much of it involved me? With Daniel's help, I began scrutinizing every detail of Catherine's life. Her credit card statements, phone logs, and even social media history became sources of information. Adam's name popped up more frequently than I had initially realized. He wasn't just a figure in her private messages. He was interwoven into her professional life as well. Meetings and appointments Catherine had described as work-related often involved venues where Adam had been present. The payments to the event planning service took on a new significance. Through careful digging, we uncovered that the company specialized in more than just discrete events. They offered lifestyle management services, which included personal security, asset transfers, and logistical coordination, a vague term that could mean anything from moving furniture to orchestrating complex schemes. It was becoming clear that Catherine and Adam were engaged in something far beyond a simple affair. Feeling like I was reaching the limits of what I could discover through indirect means, I decided to take a more proactive approach. Daniel and I rented a small surveillance camera and placed it discreetly in the living room, a space Catherine frequently used for her calls. The camera was motion-activated and uploaded footage directly to my phone, allowing me to monitor her activities without being physically present. Over the next few days, I reviewed hours of footage. Most of it was mundane. Catherine scrolling on her phone, talking to clients, or watching TV. But one evening, while I was out running errands, she took a call that sent chills down my spine. Her voice was calm but deliberate as she spoke to Adam. "Yes, everything is on schedule," she said. "I'll confirm the details with them tomorrow. Once it's done, we can finally move forward." The "them" she referred to was ambiguous, but it was clear that their plan involved more people than just the two of them. I replayed the footage several times, trying to glean any additional context, but Catherine's words were carefully chosen, leaving little to interpret. Determined to uncover the full scope of their activities, I decided to stake out the boutique hotel where they often met. It felt surreal, sitting in my car with a camera and notebook, waiting for my wife and her lover to appear. The hotel's parking lot was small and dimly lit, offering plenty of shadows for me to hide in while I watched. On the third night, my patience was rewarded. Catherine's car pulled into the lot, followed shortly by Adam's. They met briefly outside, their conversation inaudible but their body language unmistakably familiar. Then, to my surprise, another car arrived. A man I didn't recognize stepped out, dressed in a sharp suit and carrying a briefcase. He shook hands with Adam and Catherine before they all disappeared inside. I snapped photos of the encounter, my mind racing with possibilities. Who was this third man? Was he a client? A collaborator? Whatever their relationship, his presence added another layer of complexity to the already tangled web I was unraveling. The next day, I showed the photos to Daniel. He recognized the man from the hotel as someone he had encountered during a previous investigation. His name was Victor Lanning, a high-profile consultant known for his work in risk management and crisis response. Victor's involvement suggested that whatever Catherine and Adam were planning, it wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Daniel's contacts in the industry provided further insight. Victor had a reputation for handling sensitive matters discreetly, often working with individuals or companies facing legal or financial trouble. If Catherine and Adam had hired him, it was likely to navigate a situation they couldn't handle on their own. But what kind of situation required this level of expertise? Armed with this new information, I confronted Catherine indirectly. I mentioned Victor's name casually over dinner, watching for her reaction. Her fork paused mid-air, her eyes widening briefly before she quickly recovered. "Oh, I think I've heard of him," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "He's involved in corporate stuff, right?" Her response confirmed my suspicions. Catherine's usually impeccable composure had faltered, revealing that she knew more than she was letting on. I didn't press further, deciding instead to let her believe I was still in the dark. The breakthrough came when I accessed Catherine's laptop during one of her late-night showers. Her email account, still logged in, contained a folder labeled Private. Inside were documents that painted a chilling picture. Transfer agreements, legal contracts, and what appeared to be a draft of a non-disclosure agreement. One document stood out. It was an agreement between Catherine, Adam, and an unnamed party, outlining the sale of a property I hadn't known we owned. The property was registered under both Catherine's and my names, meaning she had forged my signature to include it in their dealings. The amount listed in the sale was staggering, and the funds were to be split evenly between her and Adam. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. This wasn't just infidelity. Catherine had involved me in a fraudulent scheme, risking my financial stability and reputation in the process. The betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined, and the implications were devastating. That night I couldn't sleep. The weight of what I'd uncovered pressed down on me, suffocating and relentless. I knew I couldn't let this continue, but I also knew that confronting Catherine without a plan could backfire. She was cunning, capable of twisting the narrative to her advantage if given the chance. I reached out to Daniel, sharing the latest developments. Together, we devised a strategy to expose Catherine and Adam while protecting myself from any fallout. The plan was meticulous, designed to leave no room for denial or manipulation. It involved legal consultation, carefully timed disclosures, and leveraging the evidence I had gathered to ensure that the truth came to light. As I prepared for the confrontation, a sense of resolve replaced my initial despair. Catherine and Adam had underestimated me, believing their secrets were safe. But the time had come to show them just how wrong they were. The day of the confrontation arrived with an eerie sense of calm. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering every shred of evidence, consulting with lawyers, and rehearsing how I would approach Catherine. Yet, as I sat in the living room waiting for her to come home, a weight settled on my chest. The woman I was about to confront was someone I had once loved deeply, someone I had trusted implicitly. But the person she had become, the person she had revealed herself to be, was a stranger. I had arranged the evidence neatly on the coffee table. The emails, the photos, the financial documents, and a recording of her call with Adam that I had managed to extract from the surveillance footage. Each piece told a part of the story, a mosaic of lies and betrayal that spanned months, if not longer. I wanted there to be no room for denial, no opportunity for her to twist the truth. When Catherine walked through the door that evening, She looked tired but composed, as if the weight of her duplicity had no impact on her. She greeted me casually, her eyes darting briefly to the coffee table before returning to me. "What's all this?" she asked, her tone light but wary. I gestured for her to sit. "We need to talk," I said. My voice was steady, but my heart was racing. As I laid out the evidence piece by piece, Catherine's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something resembling panic. She tried to interrupt, to explain, but I held up a hand to silence her. "Let me finish," I said, my tone firm but calm. When I reached the part about the forged documents and the fraudulent property sale, her face turned pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I pressed on, revealing the extent of Adam's involvement and the role she had played in orchestrating the scheme. By the time I was done, the room was thick with silence, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy in the air. "Do you have anything to say?" I asked finally. Catherine's response was a mix of deflection and desperation. She claimed that Adam had manipulated her, that she had been drawn into his schemes without fully understanding the consequences. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I was in over my head, and I didn't know how to get out." Her words might have held some weight if I hadn't already seen the extent of her involvement. The emails, the payments, the careful planning, they all pointed to someone who had been an active participant, not a reluctant victim. I told Catherine that I had consulted a lawyer and that I was prepared to take legal action if necessary. The fraudulent sale of the property alone was grounds for serious consequences, and I wasn't willing to let her walk away unscathed. "You need to come clean," I said. "Not just to me, but to the authorities. If you do, I'll consider not pursuing charges. But if you lie to me again, all bets are off." Catherine stared at me, her expression a mix of anger and fear. For a moment, I thought she might lash out, might try to turn the blame on me as she had done in the past. But instead, she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I'll tell them everything," she said softly. "Just, please don't ruin my life." Her words felt hollow, but they were enough for now. I knew better than to take her promises at face value, but at least she seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. The next step was to confront Adam. With Daniel's help, I arranged a meeting at a neutral location, posing as a potential client interested in one of his business ventures. The ruse worked, and Adam arrived at the agreed-upon spot, his demeanor confident and self-assured. When I presented the evidence, his reaction was predictably defensive. He accused me of stalking, of fabricating the documents, of trying to sabotage him out of jealousy. But as I laid out the timeline and pointed out the inconsistencies in his story, his composure began to crack. By the end of the meeting, he was visibly shaken, his arrogance replaced by a thinly veiled panic. I informed him that I had already shared the evidence with my lawyer, and that the authorities would be contacting him soon. "You might want to start thinking about damage control," I said, "because this isn't going away." Adam left without another word, his bravado shattered. Watching him walk away, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. It wasn't revenge, but it was a step toward justice. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from Catherine and Adam's scheme unfolded. Catherine followed through on her promise to cooperate, providing statements to the authorities and disclosing additional details about Adam's activities. Her confession helped build a stronger case against him, but it didn't absolve her of her own wrongdoing. Our divorce, which had been amicable on paper, became a battlefield as we negotiated the terms of our separation. I fought to protect my assets and ensure that Catherine couldn't benefit from her deceit. It was a draining process, but one that ultimately allowed me to reclaim some sense of control over my life. Adam faced legal consequences as well, his reputation and career in ruins. The other parties involved in his schemes came forward, adding to the mountain of evidence against him. By the time the case went to court, it was clear that he would face significant penalties for his actions. As the dust settled, I found myself standing at the edge of a new beginning. The life I had built with Catherine was gone, but in its place was the opportunity to start fresh, unburdened by the lies and manipulation that had defined the last chapter of my life. I moved to a new city, taking a job that challenged me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones, rediscovering parts of myself that I had lost along the way. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of the past felt insurmountable. But slowly, I began to heal. One day, as I was sorting through old files, I came across a letter Catherine had written but never sent. It was addressed to me, and the tone was uncharacteristically sincere. She apologized for everything, not just the affair but the choices that had led to our downfall. She admitted that she had lost sight of who she was and what mattered most, and that in trying to chase a life she thought she wanted, she had destroyed the one she already had. Reading her words, I felt a pang of sadness but also a sense of closure. Catherine's letter wasn't an attempt to win me back or justify her actions. It was an acknowledgement of the pain she had caused and the consequences she now faced. It was too late to mend what had been broken, but her words gave me a sense of peace I hadn't expected. Life, I realized, was a series of choices. Some led to joy, others to pain. But every choice brought with it the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to start again. And that was exactly what I intended to do. The months following the confrontation felt like stepping into a new life. Catherine's presence was now a distant echo, the legal battles and confessions leaving behind a hollowed-out sense of closure. I had spent so long piecing together her betrayal that when the dust finally settled, I wasn't sure what to do with the quiet. Moving to a new city had been my attempt at a clean break. The old house, the familiar streets, and the routine of my previous life all felt tainted by the memories of Catherine and Adam. In the new city, no one knew my story, and I could finally let go of the identity that had been shaped by her betrayal. My work became my anchor. I poured myself into every project, staying late at the office and volunteering for assignments that others avoided. The distractions helped, but they couldn't fill the empty spaces entirely. I began therapy to address the lingering wounds. Talking about my experiences felt like pulling out splinters I hadn't realized were embedded deep in my soul. The therapist's office became a sanctuary, a place where I could unpack the anger, sadness, and confusion that had consumed me. Over time, I started to see patterns, not just in Catherine's behavior but in my own. I recognized the ways I had ignored red flags, the times I had chosen to believe her excuses instead of trusting my instincts. It wasn't about blaming myself but about understanding how I could avoid repeating the same mistakes in the future. One evening, as I sat in a quiet cafe reading, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Elena. She was a writer, working on her first novel, and her passion for storytelling was infectious. We talked about books, life, and the twists of fate that had brought us to that moment. There was no pretense, no hidden agenda, just two people sharing a moment of genuine connection. Elena and I began meeting regularly, our conversations growing deeper with each encounter. She listened without judgment when I shared fragments of my past, and her insights often gave me a fresh perspective. For the first time in years, I felt seen and understood in a way that didn't rely on shared history or obligation. It was refreshing and terrifying all at once. Just as I began to feel like I was turning a corner, Catherine reappeared in my life. She showed up unannounced at my office, her expression a mix of desperation and regret. It had been over a year since we last spoke, and seeing her again was like reopening a wound I thought had healed. She asked for a meeting, saying she had something important to share. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small diner near my office, the atmosphere tense as we sat across from each other. Catherine looked different, older, wearier, as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up with her. She began by apologizing, not just for the affair but for everything. She admitted that she had been selfish, reckless, and blinded by her own insecurities. "I lost myself," she said, her voice trembling. "And in the process, I lost you." Her words might have moved me once, but now they felt like echoes of a life I no longer lived. I listened patiently, offering no response as she laid bare her regrets. Then she dropped the bombshell. Catherine revealed that Adam had been using her from the start. Their relationship had been a calculated move on his part, a way to gain access to my assets and connections. She claimed that he had manipulated her, feeding into her insecurities and convincing her to participate in his schemes. When she finally realized the extent of his deceit, it was too late to back out without implicating herself. "I'm not telling you this to absolve myself," she said. "I just thought you should know the whole truth." Her confession stirred a mix of emotions. On one hand, it validated my belief that Adam had been the true architect of the betrayal. On the other, it didn't excuse Catherine's choices or the pain she had caused. Her words felt like too little, too late, a final attempt to unburden herself at my expense. After Catherine left, I sat in the diner for a long time, replaying her words in my mind. Her confession didn't change anything. The damage was done and I had already moved on. But it did give me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Knowing the full extent of the betrayal allowed me to put the past to rest once and for all. I went home that night feeling lighter. Catherine's reappearance had been a reminder of how far I had come, and how much further I could go. I no longer needed her acknowledgement or apology to validate my healing. My life was my own again, and I was determined to make the most of it. Elena became a steady presence in my life, her kindness and warmth a stark contrast to the chaos of my past. She encouraged me to embrace the parts of myself I had buried, helping me rediscover my love for photography and travel. Together, we explored new places, shared new experiences, and built a relationship based on trust and mutual respect. As the years passed, the memories of Catherine and Adam faded into the background, replaced by the joy of a life rebuilt on honesty and resilience. I no longer saw myself as a victim of their betrayal but as someone who had overcome it, emerging stronger and wiser on the other side. Life, I realized, was full of unexpected twists. Some were painful, others transformative. But every twist brought with it an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to start anew. And for that, I was grateful.